Time now to go to the Bamberger Ranch. We're going to go see what environmentalism in action looks like as we go visit the work of J. David Bamberger, the retired fried chicken rancher. A man who seems to know what he wants out of this life. Okie dokie. Oh boy, this drought is bad. Mr. Steer got out of the way. Oh, there he goes. Run away.
When you arrive at the front gate of Selah, it looks like many other Central Texas ranches until you notice the number of signs along the main road attesting to the excellence in range and habitat management. Someone's done a heck of a job here. But as you pull in, you discover something else. The headstone that should give anyone pause. In memory of man who once dominated the earth, destroyed it with his wastes, his poisons, and his numbers. I don't think you'd see that kind of memorial at the King Ranch. It's tour day at Selah, and I hadn't been there 5 minutes before they had me on the bus. I was in their clutches, and we were not going to be let go until they'd taught us a thing or two.
How we went from 48 species of birds to 216 or 217, whatever we're at now, we're kind of losing count. It's easy. It's wildlife management. It's very easy. You provide the habitat, you'll have the critters. Mr. Bamberger bought the place. He had pretty much a monoculture, one habitat type. Well, we didn't have very many critters, and the critters that were here were kind of poor. Through his restorations, now we have 4 distinct habitat types. We still have the forest. We have the grass. Those are our two largest habitat types. But we also have aquatic, and also the edge habitat. And that's, you read any book about wildlife management, you go to any class about it, they will tell you that edge habitat, which is that transition between one habitat type and another, and the broader that transition is, the more edge habitat you'll have. That's a lot of your animals rely on that edge habitat.
If you live in Central Texas, there are chances that you've heard of David Bamberger's ranch. But it's only by coming here that you can realize it is more than a ranch. Selah is here as a demonstration, even a remonstration, about land use, whether it's for farming, ranching, or urban purposes. You can't be here for more than a few minutes without learning something. It's what David Bamberger calls people ranching.
What is people ranching?
It's what you think it is. It's a wonderful little phrase that David Bamberger made up.
Coined it for ecotourism, basically.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as ecotourism, except for it's coined by Mr. Bamberger.
We have a modified cattle trailer that we take you around in. We're herding you from one pasture to another.
Exactly.
Yes.
So who is David Bamberger? And why has he devoted his life and his fortune to people ranching, also known as raising the public's awareness about the environment? What makes him run?
When the Endangered Species Act was passed, that was in 1972 or 3, I began to see the paranoia, I call it, that came from the landowner, and paranoia that came from the biologist, the environmentalist. And the landowner was saying, this is a government attempt to take away our land and our private property. And on the other side of the coin, the biologists and the environmentalists will say, oh, you mustn't destroy that habitat, that cedar tree, because it's the golden cheek warbler, that endangered bird needs it. And so these two sides of these issues were beginning to, they're at war. So much so that we had 2 killings in Texas back then. So it was pretty serious. I owned land on the Guadalupe River. And it was so bad that landowners were shooting holes in the canoes of canoeists that were canoeing the river. I ended up getting the Parks and Wildlife Department to take that piece of land and make it into a state park, which is now the Guadalupe River State Park. I believe so strongly that we need to set land aside while we have the opportunity to set it aside. You know, you can put a new roof on the Alamo Dome. You can put new tires on a tour bus. But when you lose a species, there's no replacement. It'll take another heaven and another earth forever to ever have the opportunity to see that species again. And I have a kind of a weird belief, and a lot of people laugh at me, but I happen to believe that I'm related to the leaves on that tree, to the birds that fly, to every living thing, whether it be plant or animal, in a mysterious way that scientists and biologists will never have that answer. I think every time we lose a species, we're coming closer and closer to us being the endangered species. So when I dedicated my life, at that time in my life, I had an epiphany, I guess you call it. Inside of me, I had seen what was happening here, and I was witnessing what was happening around, and I said, you know, I'm too old to go back into being an activist and tying myself to a bulldozer blade or a tree or something, but I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life, and I'm going to dedicate this 5,500 acres to environmental education and conservation and research in regard to such matters.
And dedicated he has. Everywhere you look on the ranch is in some small way instructive. Grass that grows lush, springs that seep water even in a drought, rare and endangered species like the oryx, even a bat cave with 250,000 Mexican free-tailed bats that consume vast amounts of pest insects like moths and mosquitoes. Selah draws visitors from all over, and not surprisingly, some of the visitors are other landowners.
50% of our visitors are landowners, people that bought ranches or ranch land and want to see what can be done with it.
We're seeing a demographic shift in land ownership. People are not buying land anymore to be ranchers. They typically have a discretionary income and they don't need to make money off the land. And they're buying these caliche hills for the vistas and the views and the open space more so than getting a value out of it. And that becomes a different type of landowner. And I think those landowners we have had a very strong influence with, because they're the doctors and the lawyers, and they come to land ownership admittedly ignorant about how to manage a piece of property, but they also have the income that they can buy the higher dollar grass seed and plant trees. And we've had a strong influence on that shift. The older folks, the people that are still ranchers,
they're still, scraping by.
They're scraping
making
by.
a
They
living.
don't have the money, and
They don't have the means to go about habitat restoration and proper land management. So you really can't blame them. But
one of the good things about brush clearing, the state-funded brush clearing programs, is that it
Cost-sharing
helps
program.
those folks that don't have the discretionary income to. So I think that's a very positive use of tax dollars that help our watersheds. It's helping the older ranchers that don't have the kind of money to be able to just go out and clear cedar and plant grasses at a high dollar rate.
If there's one message that is uttered again and again at Selah, it's that much of what is called range or land management or habitat restoration centers around one thing: water and water management. Stephen Fulton and Colleen Gardner sit us down and show us how the land has grown out of balance by man's encouraging the proliferation of opportunistic plants. The number one culprit being the purple-berried ash juniper, or the Texas cedar, as it is known in these parts. The rain machine demonstrates. On the right side is a sample of land covered with native grasses. On the left side, a sample with little grass, but that is covered by a canopy of cedar. As the rain falls on the samples below, we quickly see how water on the grasses is slowly diffused and filtered into the topsoil. Clear water slowly runs into the jug. On the left side, a virtual flood of topsoil-bearing water runs from under the cedar, filling the jar with dirt, mulch, and water. Water that in nature would quickly run to a river and downstream.
best grass growing under mosquitoes.
We've had less than 3 inches of rain since September 19th of last year. And yet here we are on the Bamberger Ranch, and this lake seems remarkably full. All because of grass. It's this grass right here that helps to preserve this topsoil and help conserve the amount of water which actually is held by the ground underneath.
I needed water. I drilled 7 wells, 500 foot deep, but I never got a drop of water. 2.5 years after I began habitat restoration, the first little seep showed up on the side of one of these hills. It was in July, and we couldn't figure out what was green on the back of that hill. We worked our way up there, there's no roads to get to it, and discovered a seep that was seeping out of the side of the hill. We came back the next day with picks and shovels and crowbars, and we had to carry all that stuff about 1/2 mile up the hills. We dug and picked and made a hole, I'm going to say about 24 inches square. We came back a day later and that hole was filled with crystal clear, cool water. So that was the beginning. That was the most incentivizing thing that ever happened to me.
Now, what had you changed that made that seep appear?
Excellent question. Excellent question. The removal of a lot of woody species. Now, the main woody species, it was the ash juniper, which the locals are commonly called cedar. But it isn't the only one, and it is a little bit disquieting to me sometimes when I'm quoted as having got rid of all the cedar and that made water come back. That has an element of truth, but it's not it. We removed the cedar from the tops and the sides, but we had to replace it as quickly as possible with grass. Grass is the key. It's the greatest conservation tool there is, grass. It is inexpensive, it comes and goes to work quick, and it does a lot of things, but the main thing it does, when you have rain on grass, the top of the grass gets the water and then it goes down through the stems, but underneath the surface of grass, there's just as much root system as there is showing on top.
Selah is a place that talks to you as you explore it. An exhibit shows you dozens of species of grass that grow well in the Texas climate. Purple top, lovegrass, tall grama, seep muhly, switchgrass. Along the trail by the lake are a dizzying array of native trees identified and labeled. When you leave Selah, you feel like you've just taken a month's worth of botany and biology. If you're lucky, you may also pick up something else at Selah that lurks behind every sign, behind every tree and exhibit. It's a joy for the natural world and a desire to preserve it. David Bamberger's 81 now, but his race seems far from run. He still works every day at the ranch he's given away to be an example to all of us about what can be done by one person if they're committed and throw themselves into something with enthusiasm.
Of course, I've lived my life as an optimist, and I have my own creed that I teach these young people that are here on the ranch. I said, number one, never initiate something you can't sustain. And number two, nothing great is ever going to come of it without enthusiasm. You've got to think positively. And I teach it all the time. No, we can't shake the world and shape the world from any spot where any of us humans live. But we can shape an area around us. If that area is just a subdivision home or 5,500 acres or the neighbors around it, everyone can do some little contribution that can help Mother Nature or save this planet.
Selah and David Bamberger. Check their website for a visitor schedule. You'll be glad you did.